Good evening or good morning, wherever you are in the world. I'm Tan Xiao Chin, and I'm moderating the 7th YouTube session of the 10th fall edition of our Read for Pixel campaign. Yes, it's the 10th anniversary of Read for Pixels. Now, through Read for Pixels, the Pixel Project is collaborating with 35 award-winning best-selling authors to raise awareness about violence against women and to raise funds for the Pixel Project to keep our efforts to end violence against women alive and kicking. We'll be telling you more about the Read for Pixels fundraiser, which has lots and lots of exclusive author goodies a little later in this session. You can find out more about the Pixel Project by visiting www.thepixelproject.net. Now, we have a very special guest for today's live Read for Pixels discussion and Q&A session, the awesome horror poet and author Cynthia Pelayo. Welcome to Read for Pixels, Cynthia.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Oh, definitely our pleasure. Now, Cynthia is the first Puerto Rican-born Bram Stoker Award winner for her poetry collection, Crime Scene, as well as the 2021 winner of the International Latino Book Award for Best Mystery for her modern-day horror retelling of the Pied Piper fairy tale, Children of Chicago. She's also the author of Loteria, Santa Muerte, The Missing, Poems of My Night, and Into the Forest and All the Way Through, among others. Among a number of her books and poetry collections have been variously nominated for the International Latino Book Awards, Elgin Awards, and Bram Stoker Awards. Cynthia was raised in inner city Chicago in the United States, where she still lives with her husband and children. Now, aside from being with us here today, Cynthia has also generously donated some exclusive goodies to the stash of author goodies we have up as perks for donors at the Read for Pixels Rally Up fundraising page. Please note that these goodies are for US donors only, and they are, firstly, the Cynthia Pelayo Starter Bundle. Cynthia has put together a starter book bundle for one generous Read for Pixels donor who loves horror books and poetry. The donor will receive signed and personalized copies of one hardcover of The Shoemaker's Magician, there we go, and one paperback of Into the Forest and All the Way Through. And as a bonus, Cynthia will handwrite a personal note for the donor as well. The second bundle is Cynthia Pelayo's handwritten poem bundle. Now, Cynthia has specially written a free-form poem titled Collapse of the Cosmos to help celebrate the 10th anniversary of the Read for Pixels campaign and raise funds for the Pixel Project's anti-violence against women work. There we go. The poem will be handwritten on a card with stickers, and there are literally only 3 copies available in the world. So make a $150 donation and Cynthia will send your poem straight to you. Now, we've raised $3,955, which is 39% of our $10,000 goal so far. It's a little slow going at this point, so please do give generously before the fundraiser ends next month in October. All funds go towards the Pixel Project's work to help end violence against women. If you're watching this session on YouTube right now, you will also be able to ask Cynthia questions live. Just make sure you're logged into your YouTube account so that you can type your questions into the chat box to the right of the YouTube screen, and Anusha, who is today's producer and chat box moderator, will relay them to me to read out to Cynthia to answer. And now over to Cynthia. What will you be reading for us today?
I am going to read 3 poems from Into the Forest and All the Way Through. This was my, I believe it's like 2021 Bram Stoker Award nominated poetry collection. It is 100 poems about missing and murdered women, and I'm going to read 3 that are in a series within the collection that are titled A Woman of Color Has Gone Missing in 3 parts.
So viewers, just to give you a bit of a warning, if you think that this might trigger you, so it's about missing and murdered women, please feel free to step away for about 5 to 10 minutes and come back in later for when we start our discussion with Cynthia. And now over to you, Cynthia.
Great. So this is a series, and it's 3 poems, and I'm just going to go ahead and read them all together.
Go ahead.
A woman of color has gone missing in 3 parts. Gone. Is the wait 48 hours or 24, or do we call now, shout her name, drive through streets, and beg those looking on toward our holy guardians of the crossroads to conjure our daughter, sister, mother, grandmother, newborn infant, in folds of her hospital gown, wedding dress, school uniform, work clothes. Where did she slip down the light filtered crevice of a long forgotten canal? Abandoned gold mines, radiating heat, but you said she was with her friend, lover, on her way alone, walking down this single road, and she is not here now, and she is not calling, and it's time to scream her name into the universe so that her blood may vibrate with the knowing of your longing for her to just walk in through that front door of Christmas, birthdays, graduations, and moments, and you praise each and every saint whom your lips can utter. And when you can finally make that call to the authorities, they tell you to wait. The next one is titled Case. They say she left on her own. She did not leave on her own. They say she will come back. Home? It's been months, and newspapers won't print her name. Television won't show you her face. The internet is burgeoning with irrelevance. And yes, detective, I have called all of her friends, and she is not a runaway or any of those other names that are said to discredit the value of their lives, of her life. And now it's been years. Are you still working the case? Maybe you can tell me anything? It's been a decade, and I feel this cold pressure in my womb where I grew her. Did you want to see a picture of her from her graduation? She was so beautiful, and she was going to buy me a house. She always said, Mommy, I'm going to give you the stars. And I would say, No, mi hija, tú eres mi estrella. And now at night, when I look up into the celestial body of creation, I only see darkness. Body. You're at a party and your tia pulls you aside and tells you how you look so much like that one cousin from that one aunt from maybe it was from your father's side of the family who went missing so long ago and they never found her body. Que pobrecita. And she was going to be a doctora, studying late into the night, working into the twilight hours between school and work. She never slept, and maybe it was her boyfriend or that other man who eyed her that one day on that one block and beeped his horn and drove around back through the street just so he could smile. And she said his smile was all sharp teeth and bloodstains, and that was so long ago. And we should not talk about those things. And yes, she was your age. And yes, she was so beautiful. And yes, what a doctor she would have been. And her mother cried every night. And they found her mother years after her daughter went missing, clutching a sun-worn, tear-stained picture of her in her quinceañera dress, dead on the kitchen floor, her heart split in so many pieces. And there was no life worth living when so much had been taken for perhaps just a few moments of violation. I can't think about this anymore. So let's just have another drink. But there's rumors her body was found by a coyote in a canyon. But let's never talk about these things and forget how scared she must have been when she was pulled into a car, driven someplace that was not her home, touched and taken by someone who was not her love, and discarded away, fluttering in the wind like prayer flags. Her memory now joined forever with the missing and murdered, forgotten and ignored. Women, our little girls. Thank you.
Thanks, Cynthia. That was really powerful reading. It really added an extra dimension to the poems. Okay, so right, let's jump into the questions now. Yeah. Okay, so many of your books, short stories, and poems feature memorable female protagonists like Ariana Molina in Santa Muerte and the Missing, Detective Laura Medina in Children of Chicago, and of course, as we just heard, the very real missing and murdered women in the true crime poetry collection Into the Forest and All the Way Through. Now, who or what inspired you to create your fictional female characters?
They're definitely composites of various women that I've encountered in my life. And I think particularly there was this like perception in the media that Latina women are passive and Latina women are not passive at all, at least not that I know. And so it was very important for me to showcase and highlight the types of Latina women that have been a part of my life, and not just Latina women, but like, various women of color from various backgrounds, cultures, and races and ethnicities, and to show the agency with which these women operate. And I think that historically, much of media has portrayed women of color as passive, and that is not the case. And so it was very important for me to showcase these very strong women, very smart women, and how they take charge and just their power.
Mm. Yeah, that ties in perfectly to my next question. So, horror as a genre in both modern and folk storytelling has traditionally not been kind to female figures and characters, especially in terms of stereotypes and tropes. Women are portrayed as everything from murderers like Lizzie Borden and Dracula's handmaidens to helpless and sometimes nameless victims, and countless horror movies can attest to that. Your stories also revolve around Latina female characters, as you mentioned. So it's probably not a stretch to deduce that the risk of stereotyping is tripled when genre, gender, and race intersect. So, how do you work around or subvert such stereotypes to create, as you said, your female characters who have agency in dealing with the world and horrors around them, including situations that involve sexism, misogyny, and violence against women and girls?
Right. For me, I think the first major issue that I took with starting to really start crafting my characters, and what I really wanted to not do
Mm,
was play into this or play into the stereotype that we often see of the sultry Latina, which
mm,
has been so damaging to so many women. It was
mm.
damaging to myself as well, that portrayal of like the sexy Latina that we've seen in so much media. And while there are narratives where women are using their sexuality as power,
Mm,
for me, I wanted to stay away from that type of portrayal. My curiosity was more in line with, like I said earlier, um, women taking charge, women being very powerful,
yeah.
women not falling into this stereotype of being passive. I have never known my mother to like be passive in any situation ever in my life. And I was always brought up to talk back, regardless
Mm,
regardless of a person's position of authority. That was taught to me by my mother, and it was taught to me by my father. Like, we
mm,
don't care who the person is, what their title is, what their financial situation is. You
mhm,
never allow yourself to be disrespected, because if they
mm,
do it once, they're going to do it again and again. And
yep.
so when I was crafting these characters, I take a lot of that part of my upbringing, that I've never been passive. So why would my characters be passive? And I really wanted to showcase that. Um, yeah, that was always a major issue for me with like seeing many women of color, the way they were
Mm.
portrayed in horror in earlier works.
Yeah, so I mean, how do you think horror authors can better portray female characters, especially female characters of color, without falling back on these harmful stereotypes and tropes?
I think first they have to be aware of what the harmful stereotypes and tropes were,
Mm-hmm.
and understand that these types of portrayals are damaging to us in the real world, because there's unfortunately a lot of people are just kind of disconnected and can't realize that this is just fiction. Um, and so I think understanding what those issues were,
Mm-hmm.
the damage that they caused, and really understanding that, well, why are some white men portrayed one way, but we
Mm.
portray women of color the same way? And so I think starting to think about the biases that we have, and there's many unconscious biases that we have from media, from our upbringing, and being a part of the conversation, meeting other writers of color
Yeah.
and talking to them. Because if you're a writer and your entire community of writers are just other white writers, well, you're never going to really have an understanding of the identity of being a person of color on this planet. And if you're not reading women writers. That's definitely
Mm.
an issue. So read women writers and see what types of stories they're writing. What are their concerns? So listening and then understanding what the issues were are the starting points.
Okay, yeah, and so to pick up on two of your points, one is which how female and male characters are judged differently, and as well as you're talking about your upbringing, about how your parents brought you up not to be disrespected. Now, your female characters are tough, resilient, and compelling in their individual ways as they face difficult situations and problems, although also generally flawed in some way, as are all people. Now, when you write, do you ever feel pressured by gender and cultural expectations to make your female characters relatable and likable?
Yes. Oh, I had so many issues with Miss Lauren Medina and how people loathe her, and they should. Of course, they should loathe Lauren. I don't want to give away the ending,
Mm.
but um, there are. What was interesting was people loathing Lauren because of her defiance to authority, because of her uh take no disrespect attitude, and I found that very fascinating. And I
Mm.
found that type of conversation came more from women than men. I found that
Ah,
men really loved Lauren, and they were like, wow, what a tough character she is. But then women were like, oh my goodness, I can't believe she shouted at her partner. It's like, it's she's human. she's
yeah.
she's a human being, and so she's going to have bad days. And I really wanted to portray somebody that is very strong. I know many women like Lauren Medina, and I have written women as tough as Lauren Medina, and I have written very quiet and soft female characters as well. And so it's going to be interesting to see how people react to Forgotten Sisters, because that
Mm.
protagonist is very um, soft, and it's so internal. And even actually with Paloma and the Shoemaker's Magician,
Mm.
she's almost like the complete opposite of Lauren, where she's much more soft, but she's
Yeah.
still very powerful. She still has a lot of agency, and she does things on her own. So it's been interesting to see people take issue with these women who are so independent and who are so defiant. And I think
Mm.
that that's the type of woman that I am. I'm not going to take the disrespect
Yeah.
um, over and over and over again, because if you allow someone to do that, they're taking a part of you, and they're diminishing your identity. And so if I shouldn't be allowed to do that in person or to my characters.
Yeah, I'm just gonna put up something that Regina Yao, who's the founder and president of the Pixel Project, she said women need to be able to have their bad days and be able to shout without being branded as unlikable. It's just us being human.
Exactly. And I think there's a strange perception that, well, if a woman is upset or she
Mm.
speaks up about something, oh, she's automatically out of line, or
Yeah.
she is. I mean, the language that's used around a woman expressing her frustration is very damaging. I don't see that type of language used when cis white males express
Mm.
their frustration with their treatment. They're seen as, well, yeah, they're being very assertive and protective of themselves. But when I say, well, I'm not going to be treated this way or spoken to this way, it's like, oh, she's becoming too much. Like, why is that? Why do we do that? That's so damaging, and it's so dangerous.
Yeah, precisely. I mean, it's a real double standard in the way that women and men are characterized and looked at, right?
Right. And I think we, and just as a side note, I think that our words are power. And if you, as a woman, if you feel like you're being mistreated, you have to say something. You cannot let things slide, because then it will become a tidal wave and they'll continue doing it.
Yeah. Okay, let's hop on to the males now. There's certainly a range from chauvinist males to those who treat and respect women as equals in your stories. Do you think that reframing how stories describe men away from hostile and toxic stereotypes and towards complexity and even vulnerability can be one of the ways horror writers can break away from harmful tropes that promote toxic masculinity and the dehumanization of women?
I'm trying to think about the male characters that I've written. I don't think I've written any toxic males. I think the males that I've written are, if I have, I
Human
can't.
range?
Yeah, I can't think of anyone that I think the males that I've written have definitely been of the position that they're more of the partner.
Mm,
They're and they're a partner, and they're, just like anybody else, that they'll make a mistake. And I don't. I mean, I'm the mother of two boys. I'm a wife,
mm,
and so I. It's been important for me as well to be cognizant of how I'm portraying men. I don't,
mm,
and so it's been very important for me to showcase good men. What does a good
mm,
male partner look like? And so it's more important for me to showcase and highlight a positive male character than a toxic male. And I'm thinking about one of the villains that I wrote, but he wasn't like, I mean, there were issues there, but I think my focus is um, being able to highlight what it looks like to be a positive male as a partner.
mm. Okay, and like yeah, to expand on that, I mean, how do you think horror stories like yours can help move conversations about toxic masculinity and misogyny, as well as how to dismantle them, forward in a constructive way?
I think like I've showcased, the various relationships, relationship structures, how those work. I've showcased various ways of working through issues with a male partner. I think what's important is to. I think I'm just. I think I'm trying to thinking of an example of issue of issue. I don't think I've covered toxic masculinity, at least in my
Not
recent
not
work.
overtly, yeah.
Not overtly. I think overall, what I've tried to really highlight is that positive interaction and the equal partnership. That there is no superiority within any dynamic, and there's definitely like the equality, and I've showcased that like in um, marital relationships and business relationships. I never explicitly said it in the Shoemaker's Magician, but that partnership is more of an asexual partnership. So I kind of wanted to
Mm,
show what that looks like within between a man and a woman, where there wasn't a lot of like physical touch. It was very like separate. So that was something else I wanted to showcase, and I don't know if that answers the question, but it's just what to show like a range of relationships um,
mm,
in the positive sense, and to stop highlighting toxic man. Like we know that's the issue. Like we know there's an issue with toxic masculinity.
mm-hmm,
And I've always been of the mindset like, well, we know what the issue is. What does it look like with an improvement? And so that's
mm,
kind of my focus, is being able to showcase more positive relationships. I don't
yeah.
even think I read books that showcase a toxic male. It's just something that I've just been very lucky.
Mm-hmm.
The male figures that I've had in my life. And I know what a good male partner looks like, and I want to be able to showcase that to readers.
Lovely. Okay, and yeah, bouncing off that, do you think that eventually the violent alpha male type character will phase out of horror as cultures worldwide start kicking out toxic masculinity? Or do
Mm,
you think it's one of those stereotypes that will stick around for much longer than expected?
I think there's still a lot to like
Mm,
investigate there, because, and I think even more so now. I mean, it's historically that's just been there, but there's just so much to dissect with what's going on there. There's a lot of issues with why are communities allowing this type of figure
Mm.
rise and become what it is? Why are workplaces allowing this type of individual? Like, we all know what it looks like,
Mm-hmm.
but as a community, why are we allowing this type of behavior to just kind of run rampant? It's a very dangerous type of personality that we see present
Mm.
across communities and across cultures. And so I think there's a lot of exploration still to understand, why is this happening? Why are we letting it go on?
Mm.
And it really has the potential, as we've seen, to escalate and become very dangerous. So I think for the immediate, there's still a lot to discuss there.
Yeah. Well, that ties in nicely to the next bunch of questions. And like so, horror as a genre, it can be seen. Horror can be seen as a genre that reflects and addresses the deepest fears of culture and society. For example, much has been made of how zombie movies are social commentary on everything from consumerism to politics.
Yep.
And we could also say that the genre reflects the deep-seated misogyny and sexism of the patriarchy, in that horror stories commonly feature some sort of violence against women. Now,
Mhm.
rape, incest, domestic violence, and other forms of violence against women are very common in horror, and consent is often absent. And the violation of a woman's boundaries can be said to be a convenient device for inducing and heightening fears of dread and horror in the reader or viewer. Now, do you think that consent is an issue that writers in the genre have started tackling successfully in recent years?
In terms of how they write about it, I think in terms of like trigger warnings have been one way. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm I am probably at the opposite end of the spectrum of many of my peers.
Mm-hmm.
I I've listened to the conversation where many people have said that horror that includes narratives with rape, violence, have
Mm.
been ways for them to process these types of issues. At least for me, I just personally can't watch this. If it's in I can't watch it in a film. I can't.
Mm.
It's too, and even like excessive violence to children. It's too much for me, and I just can't. I can't process it. Now, I recognize that many of my peers who write it and read it say that it's a way for them to process these issues. And so I'm going to always, I'm always going to champion a creator's right to create.
Mm.
Um, but it's just for me, it's just very difficult to watch or read these types of narratives. I don't think I've never been able to read them
Mm.
or watch them like in media. They're
Mm.
there, and there some people. I'm trying to think of uh, recent titles. I can't think of. There was a recent one not too long ago about like the whole genre. There's like a subgenre in horror of like revenge rape
Mm.
story, where a woman is assaulted and then she takes revenge. And so those types of narratives, a lot of women have expressed that they allow them to process that trauma.
Ah.
So it's difficult for me. I know I just can't watch them or read them. No.
Mm. Okay, I mean, and in your opinion, why do you think the horror genre does turn to violence against women as a plot device or or catalyst for character development, as you mentioned just now, so often?
I wish it wouldn't. And I might be I wish it wouldn't. I wish I
Mm.
just don't. There's there are so many stories that we can explore without the obliteration of a woman's body.
Mm.
And I think there's been so many narratives that have, and again, I'm sorry to my peers, and that's of course, again, I'm always going to say I am going to champion any artist's right to
Mm.
create, but there's so many other storylines that can be explored
Mm.
beyond the violation of a woman's body. So I've always been fascinated that this is just taken. I mean, we can go back historically and see that these types of narratives have been there. I would like to see a more diverse storylines, but it is a storyline that we see again and again. The violence against the female form, and I find it puzzling as someone that's been consuming horror since the early 80s. I mean, many of the films that I've watched very young, like I Spit on Your Grave, were films about revenge rape and whatnot. And like even thinking back to it, it's like, well, there were so many storylines that could have been explored. Why is this a storyline that we see so much? And I think it's an interesting conversation to have. Like, why do we continue seeing these stories? But it is present.
Okay, so I don't know if you're aware, but so in 2018, the Staunch Prize, which went to a thriller which, quote, in which no woman is beaten, stalked, sexually exploited, raped, or murdered, unquote, was launched to much debate and was awarded annually until 2020, showing that there are indeed excellent thrillers out there without violence against women. Now, do you think that such a prize might work for the horror genre? And more fundamentally, as we did touch on earlier, is it possible to write horror without violence against women?
Almost certainly, yes. Most certainly possible to write horror without centering the narrative against violence against women. I mean, you could say I've done it. I've Into the Forest and all the way through is definitely a poetry collection that's all about the violence against the female form. And I don't think I've done Crime Scene. Crime Scene, my Bram Stoker Award-winning poetry collection, is about a female body that was located and how that is investigated. But there are, I mean, we can just kind of go on and on about like the female form and like there's this divinity to the female identity and the female form. And some cultures would say like the obliteration of the female form is probably the most tragic thing that you could see, is a beautiful woman killed, a beautiful woman hurt. And so what does that mean? How do communities process that? How do families process that? So I do see why it's explored again and again and again, but there are so many different narratives that can be explored without, like I said, the obliteration of the female form.
Yeah. So I'm going to pop on a comment by one of our viewers. So Brody King, hi Brody, says the violence against women storyline goes back to the abduction of Helen of Troy in the Iliad.
Yeah,
might go back even further than that, I would think.
We can just go back, and there's always, the. I think it's even like the. Yeah, but
yeah. Okay, so let's talk about stories and storytelling because they are one of the most powerful ways of bringing about cultural change. Now, in your opinion, can horror stories be successfully used to address the issue of misogyny and violence against women?
Oh, most definitely. Most definitely. And that's what I meant earlier, where so many of my colleagues write about, violence against women, rape, incest. They write so much about some of these issues because it's a way for them to really tackle head on issues of misogyny. And so it's it's difficult, right? Because so many brilliant horror writers are really exploring these very difficult subject matter by having to incorporate this difficult subject matter. But I think there's there's definitely different ways of doing it. But we did. I'm sorry, what was the original question again?
How can these stories be successfully used to address the issue of misogyny and violence against women?
I think by highlighting a lot of the language that's used by misogyny, by highlighting a lot of the gaslighting that's done, highlighting how so much of this behavior is insidious initially and how it escalates. Like we've seen that in like fiction where
Mm.
situation could be very normal, and then all of a sudden it's just throughout time we see the buildup and we see the tension. So being able to see in a narrative like
Mm.
what does this look like,
Mm.
the language, the physical
Mm.
intimidation that we see, and not
Mm.
just against women initially, but so many of these people will, behave certain ways with animals, with young
Mm.
children, and then later on, they will.
They always say it's the ones who start, like, killing the animals at a young age. Yeah.
Yeah, so it would just be, so there's definitely space to explore this
Mm.
explosive type behavior.
Yeah. And I suppose the key thing is, how do you find a balance between showing violence as an integral part of the story, but not showing it gratuitously, excuse me, and maybe even get across that violence against women is not acceptable.
Right. I take issue with portraying someone's suffering as show, like,
Mm-hmm.
and so which is why I've kind of stepped back from consuming so much true crime, and consuming so much true crime was done in order to write Into the Forest and all the way through. um but I take issue with the consumption of suffering as entertainment,
Yeah.
and I think that's a concern of mine. But and where is that? Again, it then becomes difficult because I don't want to. There's areas of censorship, right? Our
Mm-hmm.
artists should be allowed to explore their art, but when there's like true crime cruises and
Mm.
doing all this strange programming about certain cases of women over and over and over again,
Yeah.
you're just playing into that suffering again and again and again. um, and the sensationalization of some of these issues, some of these crimes, is also very strange to me, because
Mm.
there's so many women of color that have gone missing, that have been murdered, and their cases are never talked about.
Mm.
But it seems like certain cases are just discussed over and over and over again, or written about, because they're sensationalized and people are consuming it as entertainment. I think there's space for definitely writing about this,
Mm-hmm.
exploring it, and bringing awareness to many of these cases that need to be solved and need to be addressed.
Mm.
I don't know if I answered your question.
Well, maybe the next one can help you to drill down a bit more on that. So what are some of the techniques that horror writers can use to diffuse and turn toxic tropes of violence against women on their head if the story calls for the inclusion of, let's say, rape or domestic violence? So some of the techniques.
I think writing about it from that character, writing about it from the first person character,
Mm.
exploring it internally. Like, what did these? I think you know, I think we don't think. I would like to see some of, and I know they are present, but being able to see from that character how this event destroyed their life. Like,
Mm.
how did this, being able to see that character navigating physical trauma there, after the issue, and navigating the horrendous situation of, if they report it, just navigating all of that. Like, that's so much part of the horror as well. Like, you go
Mm-hmm.
through this very physical violation that is terrifying, because these people can be killed. So you go through that suffering, and then you go through the issues with the physical recuperation, the issues with reporting it, the how do you pick your life back up. It's such a grueling emotional, physical, spiritual um thing that these
Yeah.
women, so many women encounter. um Acts of violence, like acts of domestic violence, acts of physical violence. What does that do to their life? How does that impact their day-to-day concentration of work? How does that impact their day-to-day concentration with their children if they have children? How does that impact their day-to-day concentration on themselves and self-care? It would be really interesting to, be able to see that. And like I've said before, like, when somebody is murdered, we forget that they leave behind a family. And so many of these family members, they are never the same again. When a woman is assaulted, when a woman is a victim of abuse, either mental, physical, or sexual, what does that do to her long term? And how has that completely changed her life? Being able to explore that, because I think the issue, so much of like the issue with toxic masculinity is we don't talk about that this behavior causes so much psychological, physical, emotional, and spiritual damage. And these people are just running around destroying people's lives. And they're getting away with it over and over and over again. And many of us who have been victims of it, we're never the same. We're completely changed. And so what does that look like on film? What does that look like in poetry? What does that look like, that transformation because of suffering? What does that look like in narrative?
Yeah, and that ties in perfectly with a question from Regina, who asks, can you share some tips for portraying female characters who have experienced rape or domestic violence or any other form of gender-based violence without reducing them to the sum of their trauma?
Right. I think being able to explore it, like I said earlier, like internally, like what are they experiencing? What does their day-to-day look like after experiencing this life-changing, this completely life-altering situation? It would be, I think we need to see more and more that this isn't just one event or a series of events, but this is debilitating in many instances. This is life-changing. Violence against women can change the entire course of their life. So many women have packed up their belongings in the middle of the night and left houses, left apartments, either alone or with children, with nothing, to escape very dangerous situations. What does that look like when you have to pack up everything in your house when your partner is not there because you're terrified of them discovering? You would rather live in the street, and your car is more safe than your home. That's just horrible. Like, how do we see, we can explore that. And this happens every day. Women leaving homes, women experiencing abuse very young and not being able to leave their houses. Like, what does this look like? So, yeah.
Okay. All right. Wow. Okay. We've like zoomed through the questions. So we've got a couple of questions that are a little bit more personal. So, parents are usually the most influential role models in a person's life. As a mother yourself, what do you think parents can do to help prevent violence against women and girls in future generations, and to get boys involved in helping to do so?
Yeah. So I have two young boys, and it's been very important for me to have my boys around as many different people as possible. I mean, we have trans people in our life, we have women from different cultures and different backgrounds in our life, different sexual identities. So I think it's been very important for me to showcase to them like the richness of like what a woman is and what she can be, and the differences. And definitely like the types of language that I use with them, and even just like language around gender with them. I think I'm very careful with the types of things. I definitely don't talk to them the way that my parents used to talk to me back in the 80s, where it was like, this is this gender and this is this gender. And it was just so strange. And like, looking back on it now, and like looking at my children now, and they wear pink, and they, color's just color, and they play with dolls. And it's like, I remember very clearly, the separation that boys in my household had to play with like G.I. Joe, and I had to play with Barbie, and it was very separate. And now it's just kind of like it does, they're children, and love is love, and we should have love and respect for everyone. I think that's been really wonderful to be able to do that, to raise my children that way, and expose them to as many different people and identities as possible, and to highlight to them that a woman can be anything that she wants to be, and that they're very well aware of that. Women can any range that they anything that they want to be.
That's great. Okay, I think we have time for one final question from Regina again, and she asks us, do you have any tips and suggestions for publishers and editors who wish to join the efforts to address sexism, misogyny, and violence against women in the horror space?
For suggestions for publishers, any tips or
Perhaps with an eye to what they read?
right, to address sexism? I mean, I think the first step for publishers and editors is just making sure you're publishing more women, making
Mm,
sure you're signing more women from different sexual identities, women from different cultural backgrounds. I think that's definitely a first step, because there's so many different, if you're only publishing
mm,
male voices, you're definitely not really understanding the landscape of what women are writing about, reading about, concerned about. So I think that definitely the first step is to publish more women, and we're seeing this wonderful rise of women in horror. And horror is a horror is very fascinating, because way back you used to just think, well, horror, and there's just one category of horror. Well,
yeah.
within horror there's so many different subgenres, anything from extreme horror, which is very
Mhm.
extreme, to quiet horror. And you would think, I mean, people who are people with a stereotypical mindset might think, well, most women are just writing soft and quiet horror. That's not the case. There's this huge growth of women writing very extreme horror and splatterpunk horror, very challenging misogyny, challenging violence
Mm.
against women. So it's very interesting to see this growth, and I think it's because publishers are finally listening and editors are finally listening.
Yay. And, long may that trend continue. Yeah. Okay, so we've come to our last two questions. So you have been so very incredibly supportive of our Read for Pixels campaign and our anti-violence against women work as a whole. So this may be a bit obvious, but why do you support the cause to end violence against women?
Oh, why do I support the cause? Well, I mean, I've seen what violence against women can do, uh,
Mm,
mentally, emotionally, physically. I've seen many women quieted because they were scared to speak up, uh,
mm,
because they were in dangerous situations, and they didn't have access to safe communities and safe spaces. And I've seen what the emotional, physical, and spiritual consequences of this abuse can do, and
mm,
it's heartbreaking to see what this does. And so I'm very supportive on discussing this, writing about it, seeing it in literature. And like we
mm,
said, I don't want, there is ways to explore it within the literature without making it like gratuitous in a way, right?
mm.
There's ways of exploring it and what it does and how it can impact communities. And so that's just why I'm interested in this cause.
Yeah, well, actually, that ties in very nicely to the last question, which you kind of already half answered, but I'll ask it in case you have more things to expound on. In your opinion, how can authors like yourself best support efforts to kick off social change to end violence against women?
Oh, we're writers. We're like magicians. We're very powerful with our words. I mean,
Yeah.
Into the Forest and all the way through, I wrote it without the intention. I just knew I had to write about this because I just remember sitting there and reading about, all of these women. It started with the city of Chicago, like all of these women going missing, and then kind of looking at it at other geographies and just being like overwhelmed, like, why aren't people writing about this?
Mm.
And then, you know, there's so many storylines that are just kind of writing about this, but not really highlighting how scary this is. Like, how
Mm.
are we okay with all of these women just kind of disappearing or being murdered or going? And so, I think, we have the power to explore various narratives and various storylines. So I think, as writers, we can explore it in our fiction, explore it in our poetry, talk about it, with organizations like yourselves and support
Mm.
organizations like yourselves. Um, it's a very important issue to me, and it's actually not the novel that I have coming out next year, but the one coming out in 2025. I'm coming back
Mm.
to the issue of missing women, and that's what I'm going to be talking about heavily in that next
Mm.
novel, just because there's still so much work to be done.
Yeah. And on that note, we've come to the end of the question and answer session. Thank you so much, Cynthia. That was a really great session. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. And just to recap, Cynthia has also generously donated a couple of awesome goodies to the stash of author goodies we have up as perks for donors at the Read for Pixels Rally Up fundraising page, which are firstly, the Cynthia Pelayo starter bundle. So Cynthia has put together a treat for one generous Read for Pixels donor who loves horror books and poetry. And this is a starter book bundle comprising of signed and personalized copies of one hardcover of The Shoemaker's Magician, and one paperback of Into the Forest and All the Way Through. There we go. And as a bonus, Cynthia will handwrite a note for the donor as well. Now, the second bundle is Cynthia Pelayo's handwritten poem bundle. And Cynthia has specially written a free-form poem titled Collapse of the Cosmos to help celebrate the 10th anniversary of the Read for Pixels campaign and raise funds for the Pixel Project's anti-violence against women work. And you saw it there. The poem will be handwritten on a card with stickers, and there are literally only 3 copies available in the world. So make a $150 donation and Cynthia will send your poems straight to you. And please note that these goodies are for US donors only. There are also plenty more goodies available from authors such as Anne Bishop, Brandon Sanderson, C.S.E. Cooney, Charlene Harris, Emily X.R. Pan, Mary Robinette Kowal, Jen Williams, Jasper Ford, Maya Rodell, Eloisa James, and more. We have raised $3,955, which is 39% of our $10,000 goal so far. It's a little slow going at this point, so please do give generously before the fundraiser ends next month in October. All funds go towards the Pixel Project's work to help end violence against women. Now, okay, let's put this up there. So you can donate to get these goodies on RallyUp at tinyurl.com/R4P RallyUp 2023. Do note that these are case sensitive, so make sure you get your capitals right. And if you want to learn more about Read for Pixels, including our list of upcoming panel sessions and author live streams, you can go to bit.ly/read for pixels. Now, the Pixels Project's Shirley Jackson Award nominated and Audie Award nominated charity anthology, Giving the Devil His Due, which is kind of like the Twilight Zone meets Promising Young Women, is available in ebook, paperback, and audiobook editions. You can order it from major booksellers worldwide, including Amazon, Audible, Kobo, Barnes& Noble, Spotify, Google Play, and more. Obviously not from Book Depository. It's an old slide, forgive us. For more information about the anthology and how to score a book plate from the authors, visit bit.ly/giving the devil his due. As well, you can also find out about the audiobook edition, which is available from Audible, Apple, Google Play, Spotify, Kobo, Chirp, and major audiobook retailers worldwide. For more information, visit tinyurl.com/GTDHD audiobook R for P. All net proceeds go towards keeping the Pixels project's campaigns, programs, and initiatives such as this one alive and kicking. And please note that the anthology is a limited edition which is only available until October 31st. And that's the end of next month. So get your copy or copies now before it goes out of print. To find out more about violence against women and what you can do about it, visit the Pixel Project's website at www.thepixelproject.net. Now, Cynthia, I believe you have an announcement for us?
Oh, my next novel, Forgotten Sisters, is now available for pre-order. It's out from Thomas and Mercer, so if you just search Forgotten Sisters on Amazon, you'll be able to find it. It's out
Awesome.
March 2024.
So coming soon in about 6 months or so. Okay, and that's the end of our session. Thank you very much once again to all. Have a good day or good night wherever you are in the world.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.